Hi, everybody. My name is Mark Bland, and welcome to The Hot Seat. Let me give you a little bit of background on this first episode of The Hot Seat, what the purpose of The Hot Seat is. The Hot Seat is simply designed as, well, we've all been online before. We've all gotten into those conversations and those arguments with individuals. One extreme versus the other extreme. She said this, he said that. Eventually, everybody dogpiles on and it falls apart. Well, I decided, hey, I want to take those conversations, pull them offline, and put them live on stage for you at home and the viewers around the world to watch. Because I feel that some of these situations need to be discussed in a very straightforward and direct manner, and people need to be held accountable for their positioning. So, on today's episode of The Hot Seat, we're going to be talking about cannabis legalization. That's right. First up, I'm going to be welcoming to the stage Jared Opsal. He is with the NCADA here in the St. Louis area. Welcome, Jared Opsal. Thank you so much for being on the show. Appreciate it. Now, on the other side of that, a leader with the pro-cannabis movement, a gentleman by the name of John Payne. Please welcome John Payne with Show-Me-Cannabis. Thanks for coming on, John.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Well, gentlemen, welcome to The Hot Seat. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for being here on the show. We're going to be talking about cannabis legalization, as I already stated, and there are 23 states, including the District of Columbia, that already have legal medical marijuana or decriminalized cannabis. And being a part of the anti-side of marijuana legalization, you have a daunting task currently, Jared. And the fact that there are a lot of people, it's becoming much more popular. How do you, in that situation, maintain focus when you have much harder core drugs that are a little bit easier for people to go, that's bad, versus marijuana, which is gaining popularity to the point where they've decriminalized it in so many places? How do you guys stand on that?
Well, to backtrack on your initial statement, I wouldn't necessarily say we're completely against legalization. One thing I want to make sure everybody understands is that we're looking for the best public health policy for the community. And we want to have something that does not have more illicit drugs available to kids. That's our primary concern. Because data shows over and over and over again, and John's spoken about this with us many times too, is kids using drugs, it's not a good thing. I mean, I think all of us know that intuitively, and now there's tons of research showing why it's not a good thing. Because it damages their brain. It sets them up for other problems later on in life. So we're looking for a policy, whether that's one of the new ones that have come out recently with the District of Columbia, which is very intriguing. They have a new drug policy where they're allowing people to, in essence, grow and share marijuana. That's interesting because it's not opening up to the free market and commercialization of a product. And as we know about the free market, it's the best way for anyone to make money. I mean, the free market is about making money. But it's not the best thing for public health policy because they're not concerned about the health of anyone. They're concerned about the bottom line. And that model in D.C. right now is intriguing because it takes that equation out of it. It allows people to possess, it allows people to use. It just doesn't allow people to sell or buy it at a store on the corner. It doesn't allow people to advertise it either.
Now, you've made two really interesting points, two different alleys. Where do you think the inherent health risks are currently with cannabis that you guys are using as a focal point?
As I just mentioned, the biggest health risk is to kids. And that's really any drug use, whether it's alcohol, tobacco, more dangerous substances like cocaine and heroin. It's all about the youth use rates. And what we've seen in different states that have had medical laws passed where they're allowing medical use of marijuana, we've seen youth use rates increase. And that's very troubling to us because we're seeing the access is increased, so therefore there's just more kids that have access to it. And we've had about 10 years of data now to see this, and that's a pretty consistent trend in every state that has medicalized marijuana. Youth use has gone up a little bit. And that's troubling because of all the issues I mentioned and how it sets them up for having problems later on in life.
So basically you're looking at it from the form of it's a gateway drug to an extent that might lead to other things down the road.
I wouldn't necessarily put it that way. The gateway is that it could lead them to a drug problem with alcohol, a drug problem with marijuana, the initial drug they were using, drug problem with prescription drugs. And data has shown over and over again that when a kid uses anything at a young age, 13, 14 years old, it really primes their brain for addiction. And the data plays out, and this is a meta-analysis of about 30 different studies. Kids using anything, alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, prescription drugs at that age, about a 6.5 times more likely chance of having a drug problem when they're older. And that slowly decreases as they become older.
Now, John, where do you stand on this? Because basically, Jared has presented this idea that cannabis tends to be, like, you didn't say specifically itself, a gateway drug. But at the same point, that has been, I would say in most cases, everybody out there watching the show has heard us talk about marijuana as the baseline gateway drug that leads to many other things. He's talked about some of the inherent health risks. There's something I do want to get to. Like I said, there was 2 alleys you went down. I would like to talk about the medical applications when it comes to things like PTSD, but how do you feel when they put you into a position of stating that your cause of being pro-cannabis basically is just potentially leading people down this roadway of turning them into potentially harder core drug users and people in that type of a situation?
Well, when we talk about marijuana being a gateway drug, I think a lot of people think that it's because of something inherent in cannabis itself, when in fact a lot of the studies have shown that it's actually the black market that leads people to get into other substances. Because when it's in the black market, people are interacting with people that are selling things that are also illegal. So they're interacting with people that are selling also cocaine or methamphetamine, and so that leads them to try those other substances as well. There was a study that was done that studied drug users in San Francisco as well as drug users in the Netherlands, where cannabis has been not officially legalized but tolerated, and so it's legal to purchase and use over there for people over the age of 21. But not in San Francisco, at least at this time. This was in 2004. And the drug users in San Francisco that use cannabis were more likely to use other substances as well than the drug users or the marijuana users in the Netherlands. And the authors of the study attributed this to the fact that in San Francisco it was illegal, and so these people were interacting with drug dealers who were also selling cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin. Whereas in the Netherlands, they were going to a coffee shop and buying it there, where all they were buying was cannabis and maybe a cup of coffee. So I think that the gateway oftentimes is not cannabis, it is the black market. So what we hope to do is legalize cannabis, bring it into a regulated market where it's not going to be sold with other substances that are much more damaging.
Now, when you're talking about the black market aspect of this, and I think this is extremely important, one of the biggest anti-legalization groups in the world is technically the drug cartels. And the reason the drug cartels are against it is because, well, it cuts into their financial base very heavily. If people don't have to go illegally to the street and black markets to get these things, then they don't necessarily need that underground supplier to feed those markets. So that's a very dangerous group of individuals. And those people, we know for a fact, will kill if they feel threatened enough. And they're not afraid to go places and kill for their protection of their financial base. Does that scare you? Where do you stand on that, Jared? Where do you stand on that, John? Because I think that that's something that really needs to be focused on. Because, listen, there's a lot of crazy things going on in this world. We're based out of St. Louis, Missouri. The show is. We obviously in 2014 realized things are not always as they seem, and things can go out of control like that very quickly. This is a situation where you're starting to mess with people's money. Let's be honest, you're technically effing with people's money, and at that point, they're going to take it personal. Where do you guys stand?
In relation to that, what we're going to see is they're going to find other ways to make money. We're starting to see their production of poppy has gone up to produce heroin. We're starting to see methamphetamine production go up because their marijuana money is not coming in as much as it used to. So they're going to find a way to make money. So it's really about, I want to go back to, again, that public health issue of what is the best policy in place to make sure use is low, to make sure we don't have a lot of heavy users or people who are addicted to the drug. And if my biggest concern and our agency's biggest concern is modeling exactly after alcohol. Because if we have a market set up similar to alcohol, but we have advertising on sports stadiums, we have advertising at kids' little league games, at kids' little hockey games, on the boards for the peewees, We're seeing Bud Light, you're seeing Budweiser, you're seeing Miller Lite, all these different alcohol ads everywhere. You're bombarded with this idea that alcohol is inherently fun, it's good, it's okay, you're going to have a good time using it. Imagine that exact same thing for marijuana. It's inherently fun, good time using it. All these kids see these positive messages, and they don't necessarily understand the consequences of overuse or the consequences of use when they're a child as opposed to a 21-year-old or even an older adult.
I see.
You know, I really don't have a problem with some restrictions on the advertising of cannabis, so I think we can find some common ground there. I do think that we're going to have some sort of market in it. I don't think it can just be legal to grow and share. I think that there is going to have to be some kind of way for people to market it, to get rid of those cartels, or else we're going to have a black market that persists, and the only way that contracts that can be enforced in a black market is through violence, and that's what we've seen in Mexico for the last 6 years. A lot of people don't realize this, but more people have been killed in Mexico through the cartel wars than have been killed in Afghanistan over the last decade. So we've had a...
Oh yeah, they're finding pits of 900 dead people, like
Yeah.
just pits, just filled.
It's one of the most deadly places in the world right now, and that's largely because of our drug policies. And so legalizing cannabis could go a long way to fix that. But I do think there's some common ground here with regards to the way we could regulate cannabis and get rid of, not have a huge commercialization of it, to keep it out of the hands of kids. I think we can be in agreement there that if we get rid of some of the, not allow some advertising. But I also do want to say that cannabis is not as harmful as alcohol. You know, there have been studies done on this. The Lancet, which is probably the most respected medical journal in the world, did a study on trying to rank the relative harms of different drugs, and cannabis came in dramatically lower than alcohol. Actually, they found that alcohol was the most harmful drug. And so when we think about it that way, if people started, and that we've also seen that in places where cannabis has become either medicalized or legalized, people are using cannabis and using it as a substitute for alcohol. So there might be some public health benefits there, actually, if people started drifting away from alcohol and towards cannabis.
Interesting. Now, one thing I did want to bring up, because I think it's very important, is that Colorado recently switched over. They've been doing fantastic as a state when it comes to cannabis and having it legalized within their state. But one thing that did happen at the end of 2014 was that the states of Nebraska and Oklahoma sued the state of Colorado. And the reason that they sued the state of Colorado is because they were saying that because Colorado has now legalized cannabis, that was actually sending a criminal element directly into their states, which are next door neighbors. And therefore, it was becoming taxing on their law enforcement and stuff like that, because those still are anti-cannabis states. So my question is that as we roll into these situations and as we open up these doorways, you're still going to have little pockets like this where these people are playing along, but these people aren't, and we can't protect all the borders of all the states. Like we're not going to treat this like Mexico and Canada, and we're going to put up walls and say these people can get into this state, but these people can't. So where is that middle ground? At what point are we going to stop being stupid, in my opinion, and we're going to just start going, hey, listen, and this is not a knock on you, Jared, but listen, people are into this. This is something that we need to jump on top of. Let's just go full-fledged. Let's go open up the doors nationally on cannabis decriminalization. Let's not have this problem anymore, because the tax benefits that could literally help the citizens of this country all the way across the board in every single state are extremely important, and they're showing rise in Colorado, rise in Washington, D.C. They're showing benefits. So, and that's not even talking about the medical benefits. So, like, how do we argue that down? Like, I can understand, let's not legalize heroin. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can understand the deaths that are attributed to alcohol and things like that, and tobacco. But at the same point, like, you don't necessarily have a lot of those connotations with medical marijuana or with marijuana at all. So,
in relation to the tax things with marijuana, and this goes for alcohol and tobacco as well, it's difficult to find that balance of how much should you tax, especially with marijuana, which has a prominent black market at the moment, to put down the black market, but also, have it to where you're receiving benefits from that tax amount that's coming in. And right now with alcohol, we haven't raised the alcohol tax in over 20 years. And we're seeing a lot more problems compared to the money we're bringing in for alcohol. We have about $200 million a year of social problems related to alcohol right now. And now granted, alcohol causes a lot more negative effects on your body than marijuana. So let's say it would only be $100 million a year for marijuana if it was fully legalized. I'm not sure that we'd bring in enough money in Missouri to handle that cost on the state. Right now, I think Colorado is anticipating about $80 million for last year, the last I saw. Does that sound about right, John?
I think that's about right.
And they still don't know. And again, it's a little bit of we don't know what the social costs are going to be yet. That sort of data takes years to come out. We don't know what the social costs for usage, for accidents, for people driving when they're using the drug, all the other issues related to that. And it's going to be very difficult. And what I suggest and what our agency is suggesting, we need more research. We need to see how's it going in these other states. We need to figure out what the best policy moving forward is for Missouri.
Well, I'd say that more research is definitely always great, but I'm very skeptical that prohibition has really controlled any of these social costs with regards to cannabis, or back when we tried to prohibit alcohol back in the 20s and 30s. Yes, I acknowledge that there are social costs to alcohol and cannabis, but I don't think that when we've prohibited them, we've really controlled those costs. Those costs were still there. People were still using them. People were still driving under the influence of cannabis and alcohol. And so, I don't see why we shouldn't legalize those substances, try to regulate them as best we can, and then use some of those tax revenues to address the social costs that are going to be there, whether we have them prohibited or not, whether we have them legal or not, because we cannot just click our fingers and make those substances disappear from the face of the earth. We have to acknowledge that they're there, that people have an innate drive to want to use them, and we have to deal with that reality.
Well, guys, I got some questions from the audience that we're going to be taking right now. So if you give me 1 second here, let's go over and grab this microphone, and I'm going to go up to somebody randomly here in the audience. Is there anybody if I can get this microphone off right here. Is there anybody here who has a question that would like to ask a question of the people? Yes, sir. What's your name?
Jacob.
All right, Jacob. And what question do you have for our two panelists?
So I've read online that the state of Colorado has not experienced an increase in car accidents in 2014 versus 2013. Do you think that's reliable evidence that cannabis legalization does not increase car accidents?
If that data plays out over the next few years, then we'll see a trend there. But it's very difficult to ever have 1 year of data and then extrapolate that out for this is how it's going to be. Similar instance here in St. Louis, we had a dramatic crime decrease a couple of years ago, but now everybody's talking about what a big crime issue we have because we've seen violent crime go up. It's very difficult to take 1 year of data and then say that's what it's going to be like from here on out.
I would agree with that. I would say that it's not. We can't just look at 1 year and say that that's the be-all, end-all. However, an economist at the University of Colorado, Denver, Daniel Rees, has done a study on looking at medical cannabis states versus non-medical cannabis states and the rate of DUI car accident deaths. And he's found that actually it looks like there are lower death rates in the states that have medical cannabis laws, and they attribute this again to people substituting cannabis for alcohol in those states, and so they're less likely to be drinking and driving, and thus causing a lower rate of drunk driving deaths on the roads.
Plus, I feel it's very hard, as you said, like there's this increase in violent crimes. It's easy to lump drugs and cannabis and things like that onto those statistics when those might not have anything to do with the raise in violent crimes. So, did you have something else you wanted to ask?
Question. So can you name any examples of where cannabis was legalized and car accidents increased? Because we've seen some instances in which they did not increase. So I was just wondering if you knew of any times that DUIs and accidents did increase on account of cannabis laws.
I do not have that data in front of me and on the top of my head to be able to answer that for you. I apologize.
All right, anybody else have a question for our panelists?
Hi, I'm Marissa. I was wondering what other statistics you look at to determine if it's a positive or negative rate, car accidents, crime, population health, anything like that. What are some of the other things that you look for and measure?
To determine if it would be a positive or negative effect on health or society. Right. You named a lot of them. I mean, crime, youth use rates, adult use rates, car accidents. There are a lot of different issues that surround this, and it's very, complicated. I mean, this isn't as easy as I think a lot of us would like it to be of, okay, legalize, not legalize. There's a lot of, gray area here that we really have to pick out. And I think we want to have a simple choice of, yes, let's do it like alcohol, or no, let's keep it the exact same way it is. And I think most people would argue that usually there's something in the middle that makes the most sense.
Are you in favor of more decriminalization or just overall legalization in small bits? Like, are we looking for one big impact all at one times?
We are definitely in favor of decriminalizing, the use of really all drugs, because we do not believe that someone who's using drugs or someone who has a drug problem, those are typically the people that are being arrested for possession, or they're having some other issue, related to drugs, that they should be put in jail. That's not the best public health policy to address those people. There's no other public health issue where we're throwing people who have diabetes or other public health problems in jail. So treating it as a criminal, element, it doesn't work. We have plenty of data showing that doesn't work. So we're definitely in favor of decriminalization for marijuana. And we're looking for, there might be another way to legalize, talking about the grow and share, as we mentioned earlier, to where there could be a way to go a little bit further, as long as we're extremely careful and we have the info to show us this makes sense.
John, what's your opinion on this?
I think we would like to probably go further than they would, but I think there is definitely some common ground here. And my organization is focused solely on cannabis, but as an individual, I'm glad to hear Jared say that that the NCADA supports decriminalization of other drugs, because I think we've really made a mistake in this country by trying to criminalize drug use, because it's a health issue. It's not a criminal justice issue. With regards to the question. I think Jared's right. There's a lot of factors to look at. One thing that I think is an interesting statistic to look at is net migration, because I think people, we can learn a lot from where do people want to live. And so, it's not something that, it's a hard number to come at, but Colorado has had increases in the number of people living there, that are moving in from other states steadily over the last few years, and that number has been ticking upwards even. It's the rate at which it is growing is increasing as well. So I think it's people are moving there because of the fact that they've had a liberalized cannabis policy. So I think that shows that it's something that people want.
Now, one thing I do want to touch on real quickly is, before we get out of here on the show, I want to touch on the medical benefits of marijuana, the PTSD stuff, and the oils and things like that are very beneficial. Where are we at on that? It's obvious that it's helping a lot of people. You've obviously said that the NCADA doesn't really have anything against decriminalizing and legal medical marijuana. So where is there even a problem? Do we even have an honest to God issue with is there an argument?
Well, to back up a bit, we do have an issue with the way marijuana has become legal for medical purposes. And that is because it hasn't gone through the FDA process. We don't know the proper dosages for someone to use these different drugs or oils coming from the cannabis plant. But we do readily admit there are probably, and there's a lot of evidence showing that there could be some uses out of this. I mean, we've seen the anecdotal stories, but we need the hard data to show what should be the dosage. How much should a 6-year-old get of hash oil? How much should a 50-year-old get? How does that interact with all the different drugs? And to put that in an analogy, we don't tell people who have a pain problem to go smoke opium or go shoot up heroin, but they're both opiates, and that's exactly what painkillers are, opiates. We don't tell people who have a headache to go chew on wood bark. Well, that's where a chemical from wood bark is what Tylenol comes from, or aspirin comes from. So we need to figure out the best way to pull those chemicals out and make it the safest for everybody. So that's why we're not in favor of the way it has been medicalized around the country currently.
Plus, go ahead, John.
Well, I don't disagree with that at all, but here's the problem. The federal government has basically restricted the ability to do that, because when they put cannabis in Schedule I back in the 1970s, when they created drug scheduling, they said that cannabis has no medical value, which restricted our ability to study it, to create the pharmaceuticals out of cannabis that Jared's talking about. So that is why the states had to take the initiative and create these medical programs. But that has, basically stopped any of the pharmaceutical companies from, creating real pharmaceutical products out of this. So, I think it would be nice if we were able to do exactly what Jared's talking about, but until the federal government changes their policies, which I think might be happening in the near future, but until that happens, this is the only way the patients can have access to their medicine. It's imperfect, but I think it's what has to be done in the interim.
So I guess what I can say based off what we've discussed today is that there isn't a lot of differentiation across the board as far as like John's opinion versus Jared's opinion, your stance and the viewpoint of anti-marijuana for the sake of what we're into versus pro-marijuana use. Obviously, there's just the small gray areas in between, like how fast we can turn it, how much we can turn it. Like, you know, one of the biggest arguments that has been brought to that, and like I said, we're short on time, guys, but one of the biggest arguments that has been brought is the fact that it's hard to dictate legalization like they do for tobacco and alcohol because there's no way to test for how high is too high. So there's a set standard spot to where like they can say, okay, this person smoked too much versus this person hasn't smoked enough. And therefore we can justify and say this is illegal versus this is not illegal. Do you see what I'm saying? And I understand where you guys are coming from. I think that there are a lot of medical benefits that are very important. And I feel that like, real quick last question that I do have. Do you feel that the legalization of marijuana on a national basis will lead to the legalization of more nefarious drugs? And give me a short comment on that.
I really couldn't comment on if that would be the case. As John mentioned earlier, most data shows that it's not particularly marijuana use that leads to people that are using other drugs. It's more youth using drugs when they're younger, 13, 14, 15. It sets them up for having drug problems later. That's the data we know. And there's some data showing, as John suggested earlier, that it's more the black market that influences people moving on to other drugs. So there's no real way to answer that question
Fair
as
enough.
a definite yes or no. It's just
No,
such a
that's fine.
nuanced topic, and that's what I want to let people know. It's so nuanced. There's so much gray area. It's not as simple as yes or no.
John?
I don't think that we're going to see legalization of other drugs, but I think we will see a move away from prohibition to something more like a medicalized model, where maybe people can go to a pharmacy if they have a drug problem and get medicalized cocaine or something, but it won't be legal or in a market sort of setting.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank Jared Opsal from the NCADA as well as John Payne with Show-Me-Cannabis for coming on today's Hot Seat. Obviously, this is one of those topics that is never going to be completely closed until there's full legalization across the nation or it's shut down completely and we go back to the ancient days. Either way, thank you for joining me on the first episode of the Hot Seat. My name's Mark Bland, and we will see you guys next time on the show.